So we're going to shift gears now, and we have your first presenter. We're going to have a workshop guided by Marisha Auerbach, a wonderful permaculture designer and teacher at Oregon State and Portland Community College. Looking forward to hearing more about permaculture rising as well. So Marisha, if you would like to share your screen, we'll go to you. Your screen, microphone, and video.
All right, are we on? I can only see you, Kim. Okay, great. Well, thank you for organizing this, Kim, and your team. It's challenging to be able to transfer an in-person workshop to being one online, and I'm really glad that everyone could join us. I'm pleased to be able to share about permaculture and food forests, as I think that both of these, but permaculture and food forests, offer delightful ways that we can respond to the current challenges with positive responses that enrich many of the current ecological, political, social, and economic challenges, while also building community and strengthening our resiliency locally. I'm having difficulty advancing my slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, so first, I want to go over what is permaculture. I know there might be some people joining us that might not be familiar with this term. I think of permaculture as a combination of the words permanent and culture. There's many different ways to define it, and so I have 4 sentences to help us understand what permaculture is. First, it is a design science. So permaculture is based in observation, and we look at the context of a place to consider how we can meet the needs for the client while also restoring ecological function. Permaculture design is guided by the native ecology. So we design our built environments for stewardship of our resources and the habitat for other beings. Permaculture begins with a thoughtful site analysis. So as permaculture designers, we look to determine the unique climatic considerations, the resources, the limiting factors, and other potential characteristics to guide meeting the needs of inhabitants on site. Permaculture design strives to reduce our ecological footprint while meeting human needs locally, using local resources while caring for other species, neighboring communities, and the global community. So we know that resilience is recognizing our interconnection, both with all the other humans in our community, the global community, and other species on this planet. And this picture here is Bill Mollison, who is the man that's accredited with founding the term permaculture, although he's not the first person to do permaculture. Permaculture has been practiced since the beginning of time by cultures that are rooted in their place. But often permaculture is seen as just a gardening system. And so I wanted to just assert that permaculture is so much more than just a gardening system. It's looking at our entire culture on how we design our lives on this planet. So I'm mostly going to be talking about food forests. And so here's some sentences to help you understand what I mean by a food forest. A food forest is an intentional forest. It's designed based on the observation of ecology in the native forest. This picture in the center shows the different layers of a forest garden. And as you look at those, the example here is using fruit and nut trees and useful plants, but you could also think about the different layers of the forest out there in our woods, where we'd have, for that tall layer, the canopy layer, we might have the big leaf maple or the western red cedar, going down to the vine maple or the hazelnut, and then our shrub layers of the red flowering currant, ocean spray, and down into more herbaceous plants, stinging nettles, and some of the sweet wildflowers as examples. So in a food forest, native plants may be substituted for cultivated plants to meet local needs. Plant guilds are developed to enhance relationships. So we're trying to mirror what we see in the native forest in our cultivated environments. And I'm not talking about going out into an already existing forest to replace native plants with cultivated plants. A food forest is a strategy for planting more trees and vegetation to enhance ecosystem functions and yield. And if anyone's been following some of the articles about how COVID is related to zoonotic diseases, one of the things that we're losing with this loss of biodiversity is we're losing ecological functions in our environments, which is causing this loss of biological buffers, is enhancing our potential for pandemics. So here's a picture of my backyard, and I look at this picture thinking about You know, how do we design to meet our needs so that we don't deplete our resource base? You know, how do we design for true sustainability? And here's some functions of healthy ecosystems. And this is what I think we should all strive for where we live, at our home habitats, in our greater community, is how are we existing in this framework in a way that creates and supports life of other species, and also how do we live our lives so that we're ensuring that there's clean air, clean water, and toxins through various filters. This is how healthy ecosystems work. Healthy ecosystems help to regulate the atmosphere by recycling carbon and nitrogen. And you can see in this picture on the right, that purple flower is a lupin, which is a nitrogen fixing species. Healthy ecosystems help build soil and soil microorganisms. So using mulch and having food chains intact helps to do that. Healthy ecosystems support healthy life by having relationships between different species. It helps to regulate pests and diseases. Healthy ecosystems help perpetuate themselves by the reproductive functions of each of the species. And healthy ecosystems are integrated closed loop systems. So if I was doing this presentation in person, I'd ask you all if you know who this woman is. This is Wangari Maathai. She's the founder of the Green Belt movement, and she's from Kenya. She's one of my heroes, and she got the Nobel Peace Prize. So she's here to remind us that it's time for an ecological imperative. We need to design to enhance ecology in our environments. So Wangari would say, we have a responsibility to protect the rights of generations of all species that cannot speak for themselves today. The global challenge of climate change requests that we ask no less of our leaders or of ourselves. So I'll ground out this presentation with these ethics on natural systems. I think this is something to reflect on how we steward our environment. So it's important that we identify and we protect any remaining forests. We need to practice vigorous rehabilitation of degraded and damaged ecosystems to a stable state. It's up to us to work on restoring the land. The third one says that that we should establish plant systems for our own use on the least amount of land that we need for our own existence. So we need to reflect on, you know, what are we consuming and what is that impact both in our community and in the global community, as well as recognizing that there are threatened plant and animal species. And so we need to create refuges for them to have homes as well. So like Wangari Maathai, many other climate experts are saying that if we design for perennial agriculture or allow farmland to revert to grassy or wooded states, that's the easiest and the most direct way to slow climate change. So agriculture can be in a perennial way where we don't have to practice tilling as often to be able to disturb the soil layers, and instead we can create an environment where the soil layers are not inverted. And by having perennial plants on the landscape, we're able to sink more carbon in the soil. So this is how that works, where plants are able to capture sunlight and then they convert that sunlight into, through photosynthesis, they grow carbon from their roots. And then that carbon in the soil that's grown through the actions of photosynthesis and the capturing of the sun is then food for soil microbes. And over time, the soil food web becomes more healthy. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as well. So right now we're also at a point where we're experiencing loss of biodiversity. I think I've heard that 40 to 70% of insect species are in decline. And when we think about that, you can consider the loss of biomass as those insects complete their life cycle and fall to the ground in a closed loop system to be able to help fertilize. There's also, there's been a great awareness of bees and the threats to the honeybee population, the European honeybee, but there's so many different insect populations that are affected by all of these chemicals in our environment and the way that things have been manipulated. So we also see increase in flooding and potential disasters, landslides. And so the more biodiversity that we have, the more that we have perennial tree-based ecosystems, then the trees help hold water in place. They increase water infiltration so that we can store more water in our soil through this biological interaction. And by storing more water in our soil, then we're able to weather drought better in our soils. So I know I've seen some articles recently about how the western states right now are in an unprecedented drought. I mean, having wildfires right now up in Whatcom County in Washington is shocking for April. And by having a perennial tree cover, we can help hold more water in the soil to avoid these sorts of catastrophes. So here's my statistic. It said that soil that has 2% living organic matter in the top foot can reduce the rainfall or irrigation needed by poor soils by as much as 75%. So that's like if you're a gardener and you're out there watering your garden every day, if you get up to 2% living organic matter in the form of compost or mulch in your soil, then you're watering every 3 days rather than every day. And not only that, but that organic matter and compost in your soil is helping to provide habitat for the soil microbes to keep this cycle going. This is a picture from the Permaculture Designer's Manual showing a tree as an integrated participant with other plants and providing lots of different ecological functions and yields for the environment. So design your landscape to mimic nature. This picture shows a linear progression of succession. And when you're thinking about your annual vegetable garden, you're on the earlier part of succession where you're constantly needing to enhance your soil, build more soil. But as we get into shrubs and softwood trees, we're creating more habitat for wildlife. And the wildlife is helping to enhance the soil and to enhance our yields. So when I think about a slide like this, I consider where I'm at and how I'm managing my landscape and how I can manage the landscape to provide for my needs as well as enhance ecological functions, and how I can work with the unique characteristics that are inherent in nature to be able to do that, to both enhance ecological functions on my site as well as provide for my own yields. So if we look at indigenous cultures all over the world, they express their sense of place through intimate bioregional design strategies. This means that the way that they design for their lifestyle, for their homes, for their food systems, for the way they make money is integrated in the context of the place where they live. So permaculture design is just a modern term that asks us to come home, to inhabit our place, and to design our lives based in the context of our place. So this is my front yard. This was a lawn just about 4 years before this picture was taken. And what you can see in this picture is that I've got a layered polyculture that's filled with fruit trees and berry bushes and medicinal herbs and plants for pollinators and plants for mulch. And there's all these different layers of the forest that are contained within the aesthetic of my front yard. And it's quite different from most other yards that I see in my neighborhood. So here's how it's expressing the 7 layers of the forest garden. So my tall tree is that sweet gum tree that's in the center, and it helps to provide shade both for my chickens in the summer when they move into the front yard, and also to block the western sun from heating my house in the summer. And the low tree layer in this picture, I've got pawpaw, I've got plum, I've got cherry, I've got persimmon. And then going down into the shrub layer, I've got elderberries and currants and blueberries and gooseberries. And the herbaceous layer has angelica, and we've got muskmallow, and there's irises, and there's comfrey. And then down into the soil surface, the ground cover crops, I've got lots of different bulbs. I've got strawberries to cover the ground. Bulbs actually go into the root crops, the rhizosphere. Right now there's a diversity of tulips in bloom. And then for the vertical layers, there's that trellis in front of my house that has a kiwi vine growing up it. And I also have evergreen clematis there. So this slide just shows the diversity of ecological services to help you get a sense of like how many different amazing things plants provide and wild animals provide that keeps our system moving. And so when we think about the Gaia hypothesis by James Lovelock, it's all about the interconnectedness of all these species that helps keep the biosphere healthy and intact. So whether you're making soil more receptive by having deep tap-rooted plants in your system, or attracting birds to help disperse seed, or creating shelter for birds and other wildlife, there's all these different things that our landscapes can provide. So I want to give you a bit of an overview of the different layers in the forest garden and how they impact a design for your yard or for our landscape. So a tree is generally something that's greater than 40 feet tall. An understory tree is considered 12 feet to 40 feet tall, and that's usually with a single trunk, is what a tree is. A shrub has multiple trunks. Trees, by being the largest species in the area, is what dominates photosynthesis, as the leaves are what catches the most amount of sunlight, and these large species use the most amount of nutrients and water. Trees determine how the rain falls on the landscape. Trees help to regulate the biomass accumulation. So they impact, you know, what the pH quality is of our soil, or how nutrients are taken up and shared. And trees also provide habitat. And when we're thinking about food forests, here's a list of all the different fruit trees that we could have in our system in our climate, in the temperate climate here in the maritime Northwest, where our earliest fruit trees to produce begin with the mulberries, and then the latest fruit trees that produce end with the medlars, which are produced in November. And if you've never eaten a medlar before, there's a beautiful medlar tree in the center of Rock Creek campus, Portland Community College. And that's the picture on the bottom right, is the medlar. Shrubs tend to be 6 foot to 12 feet tall. They have many stems and they're woody. This picture is showing a pink champagne currant, which is my favorite variety of currant. Shrubs can grow in the full sun or in the part shade, but they provide more fruit if they grow in the full sun. They provide habitat and food for wildlife, as well as shelter. They offer shelter for ground-dwelling animals. Many shrubs have evolved in a forest edge situation, and that's why they can grow in part shade or full sun. And if you're looking to propagate a shrub, it's often by suckers or by underground runners. I think about a bird or some sort of animal going through the forest and stepping on a branch, and then that branch causes contact with the branch in the soil, which then causes the shrub to root. So that's often how we see these plants propagated. And here's our line of berries of what we can grow from, starting with the earliest berries, which are strawberries in our climate, and then our latest berries are the aronia berry. The aronia berry is the one pictured in the middle picture on the right side of the screen. It's really high in vitamin C. It's the highest vitamin C berry in the world. And the picture on the top left shows a gumi berry, which is a not very well-known berry that also fixes nitrogen and will produce in the shade. We also have a honeyberry on the bottom left, then of course the hood strawberry, gooseberry on the top right, and then the picture on the bottom right is a white currant. Herbaceous plants tend to be the most abundant layer in the food forest. They tend to be about 1/2 foot to 6 feet tall, and many of them go dormant in the winter. This picture is showing herbaceous plants in a plant guild, which is a community of plants that's growing underneath an apple tree in a friend's yard in Olympia. And these plants that are shown in the herbaceous layer are actually they have a function where they're preventing grass from spreading towards the tree so that they're maintaining the edge of that garden bed. Herbaceous plants are great for conserving and cycling nutrients. Many of these plants are mulch plants. Many of them have deep tap roots where the root exudates help open up the soil and help cycle nutrients. Herbaceous plants tend to be plants that support insect diversity, and there are also many plants that attract beneficial insects. They have a high productivity due to the large amounts of carbon dioxide near the surface of the soil. There are some herbaceous plants that enhance the receptivity of the soil. Some herbaceous plants attract beneficial insects and pollinators, and like I said, this is the most diverse layer in the forest garden. So here's some of my favorite herbaceous plants that I grow in my landscape. So borage is a wonderful plant for attracting bees and other beneficial insects. But you can tell if you've ever grown borage that it has these large leaves, these fleshy stalks, and that's what's characteristic of a plant that could be known as a dynamic accumulator, or a plant that helps create mulch and cycle nutrients in a forest garden. Muskmallow on the bottom left, is also a dynamic accumulator herb. This one also has a flower that attracts beneficial insects and the swallowtail butterfly, but it creates a lot of biomass that's great for mulch, and it has that dense, deep root system, which helps open up the soil. On the right, we have some examples of nitrogen fixers. There's a lupin shown actually with borage and muskmallow in a guild with an Asian pear tree. And then the picture on the bottom right is the gumi again. So here's an example of plants for attracting beneficial insects. We've got cilantro, which is showing the flower formation of the Umbelliferae family of plants that has flowers like landing pads for insects. The flowers bloom over a short period of time, but collectively they bloom over a long period of time. Zinnia, which is the other flower shown in this picture, is in the Compositae family. And the Compositae family of plants is known for having blooms that last for a really long period of time. And that's why many of these plants are our favorite cut flowers. Now, these two plant families are some of the most common plant families for attracting beneficial insects in our garden. The vine layer, vines tend to grow along the ground unless we provide support. And the picture in the background is mashua, which is a perennial nasturtium from the Andes. You can eat the tuber. And the picture was taken in October, where the gorgeous orange blooms look so bright against that dull sky that we have when it's really rainy in October. Vines are opportunistic as they crawl along the ground, and they try to find ways to climb up to be able to gather more sunlight. So sometimes they're parasitic. They can provide habitat for wildlife, and they help maximize the use of sunlight. I like to think of true sustainability is if all energy comes from the sun, right? Like wind energy comes from the sun, that's the sun heating the land. We've got solar energy, fossil fuels are stored sunshine. Then the only way to truly be sustainable is to catch the sun on those little solar panels that we call leaves, to be able to generate yields for ourselves and for our community. So vines really help by increasing the amount of leaf space that we can have in our environment so that we can capture more solar energy for yield. The last two layers we have are the rhizosphere layer, the ground cover, which covers the soil surface, and that's a strawberry plant in the background, which is my favorite ground cover in the food forest. This layer prevents erosion. It helps enhance water absorption in the soil. It prevents evaporation by cooling the ground and shading the ground. It cools the soil temperature, and it provides shade for the soil microorganisms. Fungal relationships are also another layer in the food forest, and fungi help enhance the soil structure. They convert nutrients into an available form for plants. Fungi aid in water retention. If you think of the mycelium, that like white root-like hairs that you see under the soil where mushrooms are growing, it's like a sponge where it helps distribute the water and holds water in the soil. It also repels saline water. Mushrooms exhale carbon dioxide. They can help counteract disease rot fungi, and mushrooms can also prevent frost damage on roots. So that's really helpful in our winter months. And that picture on the left is a King Stropharia mushroom, which is a wonderful edible purple mushroom that I grow in my landscape. So when I'm designing my food forest, I like to think about local food webs. I think about how can I create more homes for all the different species that might be able to live in this environment, and how can I consider their needs and their ecological functions as a part of the system that I'm designing. So here on the bottom right, we've got a picture of the red-bellied newt, which is known for eating insects, and I'm always delighted when I see those in gardens that I've designed. So we've got these shocking statistics that we've been seeing on billboards for, over 10 years at least. I think it might have been 10 years since I've taken this picture, and I still see billboards like this up around the United States, that 1 in 6 Americans is struggling with hunger. We've got 1 in 4 children don't have enough to eat. And when I look at our land use patterns and how many lawns we have around the country, it just seems like it's a problem of managing resources rather than not being able to actually have enough food. So local production leads to resilient communities. And we're really seeing that right now as our farmers markets stay open and people are relying more on the safety that we get from being able to buy from local farms. This chart here is showing that eggs, fruits, and vegetables have the most volatile prices. And these are the things that we can produce most easily at home in our yard. I'm really glad every morning when I get a couple eggs from my chickens, and I haven't gone to the store in a number of weeks because it's all coming right here from my yard, which is only 6,600 square feet. So this is reflecting on a permaculture principle, which is designed from patterns to details. So now I'm going to show you just a few different kinds of food forests. I just made a new online course for Oregon State University, which is all about permaculture food forests, and we went around the Pacific Northwest and beyond looking at different types so that you can get an idea of how you might be able to get involved with this. This is a drone shot of my house. So this is showing the example of a home scale food forest. A home scale food forest is where you have the food forest in your backyard or in your front yard for that matter. Here's a picture of a map of my backyard. Home scale food forests can be as diverse as you can manage since it's all about growing your own landscape in your own backyard. So here's a chart showing fruit throughout the year. And so in my yard, I start with those strawberries and honeyberries, and they're coming up next month. And I end with apples, pears, quince, and persimmon. So I've selected varieties in my yard so that I always have fresh fruit to eat. And that Hudson's Golden Gem apple is a winter keeper. The Cy pear is a pear that you harvest in November, and then it's ripe in March. So I've designed so I don't need pears from Argentina. I can be getting fresh fruit from my yard for most of the year. A production food forest is where you're growing fruit for market. So production food forests need to be designed for efficiency. It's important to have ease of management because you might have various people that are working in this food forest and you might have turnover with your employees. Here's a picture of an urban food forest at an office. This food forest is on the corner of 12th and Market, and it's got the plaque that's shown on the bottom right. I think when you're in a public space, it's important to have signage so people know what's going on, so they can see that you can be growing food on parking strips that are only 3 foot 6 inches wide, like in this example. This corner space on 12th and Market in Southeast Portland has over 80 different useful species growing in very narrow strips of soil. Here's some pictures of a food forest in a school. We visited Manzo Elementary School in Tucson, Arizona, where many of the students that go to this school come from households that experience some level of food insecurity. So in this school, they have a food forest and they have educational programming for the students at all grades, and the students are learning how to build soil by managing the compost for the school. They're also learning they're learning about heirloom crops from that area, heirloom plants that grow and are adapted to the 6 inches of rainfall they get per year in Tucson, Arizona. And these elementary school students are learning how to propagate those plants. And then they bring them home so that they can have more food security in their home environments by sharing them with their parents. And this is one of my favorite food forests. This is the Beacon Hill Food Forest, which the Beacon Hill Food Forest got known internationally when it was created in Seattle, sponsored by the city of Seattle on public land. Community food forests offer opportunities for learning new skills and working with diverse groups. This is one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the city of Seattle, and there's lots of different people that come together to share this space and to grow food together. So this type of food forest is often reliant on fundraisers and donations. It's also very important to have signage to clarify the tasks and how people can participate, recognizing that some people are extroverted and have no problem interacting with people that they don't know, and other people might need a sign to be able to be guided on how they can be involved. It's important to have wide paths and adequate trellising to provide to make this space accessible for all people. And it's wonderful that Beacon Hill Food Forest is accessible for people in wheelchairs. In Beacon Hill Food Forest, they've looked at the scale of gathering spaces so that they can promote interaction between community members. So you can be in a small group or you can be in a larger group, and this was designed into their food forest. After every work party, they have a shared meal, and that's to help build community connection and to provide opportunities where they can enhance trust between community members. This is the last food forest I'm going to show you, and this is a venue food forest. This is in Olympia, Washington, and this is a food forest on the corner of Harrison and Division that hosts events and music. So it's a place where people can come for a picnic, where people might stumble upon the place when they want to see a live show, and yet they're surrounded by a resilient food system. So I hope that this gave you some ideas of what food forests are, how we can start seeing them in our urban fabric. And I feel like we're at this interesting period of time where, while we're all at home, we can revision what we want to see for the future. And I know that I want to see a future where we're helping to enhance ecological function, where the air continues to be cleaner, where people have access to clean water and fresh food, and that we're able to join in community and celebration. So that's my last slide there, my home habitat. And I think that I can open it up to questions. I'll stop my share.
That was absolutely beautiful, Marisha. Thank you so much. And if you want to turn on your video, then folks can see you and they can respond directly to you. I'm going to turn to Serena and Lyndall. If you guys can notice if people are raising their hand. There, I can see you there. And then if you can raise your hand, if you have a question or a comment for Marisha, then they'll unmute you and you guys can have a dialogue. And we have, about 10 minutes for this. Okay, so Amy Dvorak.
Hi, this was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, and perfect timing, especially with the weather and everything that's going on, good and bad. I am looking at this and thinking it's wonderful, but wondering how I can afford it, and if you have any suggestions on where we can get some of these plants at a decent price.
Yeah, a decent price, that is always selective. What that means for all of us might be different. So I will start with the cheapest way to get plants, and that would be maybe posting on Nextdoor or in some other neighborhood groups to see if anyone in your neighborhood is dividing their plants. I have practiced learning propagation, which has allowed me to get most of my plants for free or inexpensively using my skills. I also have a small plant nursery that's based off my 6,600 square foot yard. I see that Stephanie asked that question, what's the size of the yard? And my full property is 6,600 square feet. So I divide my plants and I pot them up, and then I provide them in my plant nursery. So that's posted online at permaculturerising.com is my nursery list. But I think that it's a great way to get to know people in your neighborhood by admiring their plants and asking if they'll share them with you for free. And as you build your own plants, then you'll be able to exchange with them too. Also, learning how to save seeds is a really great way to start this summer. I started saving seeds by just walking through my neighborhood and looking at seeds that were dry on a plant, popping them open, trying to just get to know what the expression of various plants are as seeds. And so that's something that we can look forward to later in the summer. I will be offering a workshop on seed saving in August. So hopefully that gave you a bit of an idea of going from getting plants for free or for trade to being able to support a nursery. Other nurseries that are open right now, I know that Portland Nursery is open. Naomi's Farm Supply is my favorite nursery in town. They're doing orders by email. And Birds and Bees Nursery is doing delivery for people who want to order from them. And I think all of those places have plants at a reasonable price. And my favorite fruit tree nursery, if you're looking for mail order fruit trees or berry bushes, is Rain Tree Nursery. We also have One Green World in Southeast Portland, and Burnt Ridge Nursery is another great nursery in Washington.
That's awesome. One of the things, this is Kim, one of the things that I was thinking about while you were speaking is just how many people are feeling called to do victory gardens, right? Like there's this need for action, and of course it is a privilege to even have any land at all. So, you know, what does it mean? And you have brought up some of the public spaces. How can folks who are in apartments or smaller spaces do some of this work?
Yeah, we can grow things in containers. So if you have access to sunlight, that's one way that you can have some soil if you're in an apartment. The community gardens are also great places to have access to land. There's community orchards as well in many neighborhoods in Portland, where you can have access in exchange for being able to collaborate with people on stewarding the area. I know that Portland Community College also has the Learning Garden. So I don't know how many of these places are open and at what scale. I do know that some people are able to go to their community garden. I want to give a shout out to Albert Kaufman, who's on this call. He's got a website or a Facebook page for an organization called Farm My Yard. And so he's connecting people with people who need land with people who have land available. And there's many people who might have access to a yard and might not be able to get out and garden, or might not be physically able to do that, that might want to share with someone who could take care of their yard and grow some food in exchange for being able to share in the surplus.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Marisha, there are two questions on the chat page that I just want to bring up. One person asked, can you please share your favorite permaculture book for the home gardener?
Yeah, my favorite permaculture book is Practical Permaculture Solutions by Jesse Bloom and Dave Bainline.
Okay, fabulous. And Scott McLean asked, he said he didn't hear the best, you mentioned something about the best fruit tree place. And I guess the audio went out a little bit. Was it a mail order? What were you referencing?
Yeah, I see that from Stefania as well. So I actually mentioned three. I mentioned Rain Tree Nursery, which is in Southwest Washington, Burnt Ridge Nursery in Southwest Washington, and One Green World in Southeast Portland.
Okay. Okay, so you are able to see the chat page. That's good.
Yeah.
Because you can see there's one that Nirja has a question for you, and Nikki does as well. Okay, so while she's typing, let's go with one of the questions that Nikki asks. How do you make homes for beneficial but frequently misunderstood creatures?
There are so many different beneficial insects. It's hard to really consider. I don't tend to consider many of them individually because there's so many. You know, I think of the ones that I am familiar with, and then I know that there's so many more that I might not be familiar with. And for many insects, one of the ways to consider them for habitat is to not make your garden too tidy, to make sure that you have piles of leaves and branches and all sorts of different mulch materials and different textures, as well as some areas of clay that are exposed, so that these different insects can find their homes. Okay, I'm going to go to the biggest challenge to adopt permaculture versus conventional gardening. I think the biggest challenge is to be able to learn to think holistically. For me, I didn't grow up in a household that had a garden, and I grew up being just enamored with the local ecology. So I think of gardening like an ecological system rather than planting things in rows. I mean, if you can see my background behind me, it's just hard to distinguish what plants are growing where because I grow more in a perennial sort of polyculture. And not all permaculture gardens need to be a polyculture, but through learning about ecology and using that as a foundation, then it's easier to wrap your head around the differences between conventional gardening as well and permaculture. I'm going to give a little plug here, and that's that I offer a once-a-month workshop on what to do now in the garden through People's Food Co-op. It's offered February through November, and it's been so popular this year that we're actually offering it twice per month. So if you want to just sink into learning more about permaculture gardening versus conventional gardening and increase your food production goals for this year, the next class is on May 6th.
That's awesome. Hey, so we have 2 more minutes for questions. We have 2 questions that just came in. If you can do a quick summary. Let's see, we have, how long does it normally take to get a fully flourishing food forest up and running? And this person, Lydia's wanted to start one for a while. And doesn't know how much initial work it takes to get it going?
Yeah, I think that it's valuable to be strategic and to start small. I think that you can be more, you can rejoice in your successes easier if you don't use too much land to be able to begin with. And so that could just be one fruit tree with a small guild around it. As far as how long does it take to get a yield from the first fruit tree, that can be 5 to 6 years. In the first 5 to 6 years of my landscape, I supplemented by doing a lot of gleaning in my neighborhood. My partner and I run the Woodstock Portland Fruit Tree Project gleaning team, and we do our gleaning by bike. So that helps supplement. But we were eating out of our yard at the end of the first summer. And the way that we did that so quickly was by being strategic about how we were getting rid of the grass and succeeding out the grass by enhancing good materials for soil fertility. We brought in a bunch of manure and some straw bales. And so the first step in creating a good food forest would be to make sure that you're composting so that you can turn all your food scraps and organic materials into black gold.
That is great news. And so Holly did send you her question directly to you. So let's make sure to respond to hers. In addition, you've given us lots and lots of tools. So hopefully we can have a resource list. And there was a question about, is there a place to find plans, simple plans that we can to design gardens. So maybe we could just share a resource list with all the attendees after when we do a follow-up after the symposium. Okay. Anyway, if you could respond to Holly's question, then we'll wrap it up and move on to our next speaker.
Okay. So Holly says, I see it came through privately, so I'm just going to read it. Curious what stands in the way of more food forests happening, or what could be done to help make it happen at a broader scale? Any policies that need to shift, or just education? I think that it's a mental shift. It's looking at like how we own land, whether we truly do have ownership over land, and shifting that to being able to work collaboratively to be able to care for our community. I mean, the city of Seattle gave up land for the Beacon Hill Food Forest to start. There was a lot of trust involved that this, group of neighbors that came together were going to be able to be successful. And that kind of works in with Rashid's question that also came to me privately on how do you deal with the invasive weeds. You need to, if you're going to be doing a community food forest on a municipal scale in public space, then it's important to be accountable for how it's being stewarded and to take care of preventing the spread of invasive weeds. There's a book that came out, and I'll put that on that resource list, on community food forests, and they are growing every year. There's more and more community food forests popping up all over the world, and that's really inspiring.
Wonderful. This is, oh my God, I can't believe how much I've learned. My uncle's a permaculturalist, and you took us to a whole new level, Marisha. So thank you for your contributions. And of course, you're an amazing teacher too. So hopefully folks can take some of your classes at some time. So be sure to share your resources, but also some opportunities that people might have to get to know you better.
Yeah, and if people want to learn more about food forests, we have a new self-paced course through Oregon State University. People can sign up at any time. And then the first section is self-paced, and there's no assignments that need to be turned in. But then in the fall, we're going to be having an instructor-led practicum. So I'll be working with students to get them through the design of a food forest on a site of their choosing.
Okay, maybe you can put a link or two also in the chat page so people can grab those.